Hello, welcome back to Reading Moments with Minister Williams. Today we're going to continue Crushing by T.D. Jakes. God turns pressure into power. We are going to start with chapter 2. We did chapter 1 last week. Quality control. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. Harriet Tubman. As we all came to terms with Sarah's revelation, I struggled. Remember last week, Sarah, they found out that Sarah was pregnant and she was 12 years old. They found out that she was pregnant. So this is picking up where we left off. As we all came to terms with Sarah's revelations, I struggled with how to function in the midst of such a feeling of powerlessness. While I believe thoughtful consideration is essential for wise decisions, there was no due diligence I could discern that can change this situation. I had to come to terms with the new reality, one I had not foreseen or could have ever imagined. Losing my mother, and especially in a way that required me to lose her both before and after her last breath, and suddenly feeling like I had lost Sarah to the world, a world intent on taking her from me, I felt buried in grief. I am not one to wallow in self pity, but when I experienced that 1-2 punch to my soul, I could only sink into the quicksand of my sadness. So many nights I stared out the windows of my home, seeing in the darkness nothing but the reflection of my own glistening tears as they coursed down my face. I usually prefer to take constructive action in the midst of any mistake, mishap, or misadventure, but my new reality left me drained of my determination. Sometimes things can hit us and we can lose our determination. We'll lose our motivation to do things. So we always have to keep ourselves grounded in God and keep God first and let God be the one to guide us and direct us in situations. This man was in despair. And the only way that he could get through the despair was through God, using God and having God with him.
Uh-huh.
That's the only way that he can be motivated to keep going.
That's true.
Somehow I could not abandon my calling to facilitate faith in the lives of others, but I also could not understand why God had allowed these two soul numbing events to transpire and so close to each other in time. I felt like a spiritual navigator who no longer had the personal GPS he had come to rely on. Instead, I had to return to something much more basic and fundamental, a trailblazer, once again gazing at the stars and at the stars for direction. Looking to God, got to keep your eyes stayed on God. I was preaching, teaching, and leading others while I struggled to navigate through deep emotions that were grossly uncharted. It was at that stage of my personal development that I found myself being planted. My outer shell was beginning to rot away so that what God placed in my core would begin to flourish. Depression always lead to a blessing. But I knew this would be a process, one that would try my patience again and again. Even as I knew Sarah must carry her baby 9 months in order for it to develop and mature enough to deliver, I struggled to understand how we would all enjoy the journey from that day on the porch until that moment in the delivery room when the cries of a newborn would puncture our celebration, would punctuate our celebration of his or her arrival. How could I endure pushing through the cold, dark ground until then? How long would I have to cry into the darkness? How would I get through this time? Despite knowing that any new creation requires time, I still struggled in the moment. But as Thanksgiving approached and I began to plan my contribution to the major meal for our family gathering, I realized that I would rather wait than rush because when it comes to the kitchen, I believe anything worth serving is worth waiting for. You see, anyone who knows me knows that I absolutely love to cook. Whenever I have leisure time, I head to the kitchen and I have a few rules. One is that I don't like to follow recipes. Savoring, savoring instead the culinary creativity that must motivate master chefs. My other requisite is a group of family and friends to indulge my endeavors. I love to cook for people who loosen their belts when they're eating and consider that grunts and lack of choice manners to be the greatest compliments, along with asking for seconds and thirds, of course. My passion for cooking meals for loved ones originated when I was growing up because our family didn't have much materially. My siblings and I didn't get excited about gifts at Christmas and birthdays, but we were exuberant in anticipation of food. He said if they didn't have nothing else, they had food.
Exactly. That's the truth, though.
Yeah, what you need. It wasn't all about no presents and all that stuff.
Mm.
You could smell the cooking food for days before Christmas.
Sure can.
You could smell the aromas wafting throughout the house, and if you were lucky, she would allow you to lick the lick the spoon. Them kids be waiting on the spoon and taste a little bit beforehand. As a result, my wife and I now delight in showing the same love my mother put into the preparation of special meals into the celebration as the celebrations we enjoy. From all those years of watching my mother prepare food for the family, and from my own limited experience in the kitchen, I realized an important lesson: quality takes time. While most people tend to agree with me, no one particularly enjoys waiting patiently for the turkey to come out of the oven or for the pie crust to be made from scratch. We want the quality, but we don't want to wait for it. Quality takes time. As I look around, it doesn't take much to see that this current generation is accustomed to fast food, instant information, and new friendships at the click of a button. Because of such immediate results, we've ignored the diminishing quality of those things we receive instantly and our subsequent lack of appreciation for them. Our desire for instant gratification has ushered us to the point that we sacrifice excellent quality because of the difficulty and time it takes to produce it.
True.
Planting and patience. Considering the amount of work it takes to produce a great meal reminds me of the way we discover and utilize what God has placed inside us, the core gifts, talents, abilities, and preferences unique to our Creator's design. Throughout our lives and amid the diverse variables of our particular environments, the same God who placed those seeds and gifts within us seeks to cultivate and harvest his initial investment. In order to multiply it even more, our Maker wishes to see these internal seeds and latent talents grow, mature, and bring forth abundant fruit used for something more. Because God is the originator of everything in us, and because we are created in His image, it makes sense that He desires to see His creativity exercised in His creations. If the cycle of nature calls for us to reproduce after our own kind, we we logically see that same inclination in the Creator who set this cycle into motion. His intention is for the seeds placed inside us to grow, develop, mature, and maximize our growth. Our current world, however, demands hurriedly produced results, and many of us have despised the day of small beginnings. Finding seeds. It is a fact that seeds take time to grow. You do not plant a seed today and expect to harvest tomorrow. We often
Amen.
we often don't exercise the patience to wait and watch and wait some more. But patience may be the ultimate source of quality control for what God is simmering in your soul and cooking up in your life. The real mystery of God is hidden in the beauty of the seed and revealed in His wonderful use of the growth process. So we abort the development process. We are compromising the power of the promise God has placed within us. Mixing the power. No, yes, that's. I guess that's supposed to be missing. Missing is the power of the promise God has placed within us. After all, the process of a seed becoming what is promised is the underlying realization of our destiny. Taking one step in the right direction toward your destiny right now does not equal you seeing your future in all its glory tonight. Who we are, the fruit we are meant to produce, and the wine into which God transforms us requires more and deserves more than to be rushed by a microwave mindset that will yield underdeveloped results. Genuine, personalized, noteworthy quality requires the luxury of time. With each with each of us being high quality seeds, the Master has planted a half hearted maturation process will sabotage his plan to transform us into something extraordinary.
Amen.
Packed with promise. One of the most beautiful depictions of the powerful promise packed in a seed emerges in some of Jesus' last words in to his followers before his crucifixion. Meeting in a private upper room, Jesus and his disciples had gathered to celebrate Passover, where he told them, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes it so that it will be even more fruitful. So even if it's some fruit that need to be pruned and perfected, God will do it.
That's right. He'll even cut off a good fruit to get two good fruit.
Yes.
He'll prune it back.
He'll prune it back.
Yeah. People don't understand that even though you're a good person, the people around you may need to be pruned.
Right. And if they can't be pruned, they get plucked off.
They'll get plucked off and thrown away. That's right. That is so true. That's something to think about.
Yeah. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. That's John 15, verses 1 through 4. The symbolic references Jesus assigns to himself, to God the Father, and to us as his followers demand our attention. The distinctive roles within his overriding metaphor convey key aspects of our personal and spiritual development in ways that his followers would immediately understand. Christ's metaphor speaks to the very nature of who God is, why Christ came, who we are, and what God has been up to since Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden after disobeying their Creator. A relationship exists between us, the Savior, and the Creator that Jesus plainly sets before us by using this powerful analogy. Instead of gardener, other translations often render the word referring to God's role as vine dresser, a specific type of farmer responsible for cultivating grapevines. From the vines the Creator cultivates, we can conclude that God desires vines with fruit bearing branches. Jesus is the vine, and we are the branches. We, the branches, depend on him for life. We could do nothing without Christ, who facilitates and sustains the vital growth process between us and our Creator and Cultivator. Jesus is the point of reconnection for us back to God and God to us. We aren't capable of producing fruit by ourselves. We must be connected, nourished, and strengthened by our vine, even as we serve the purposes of the vine dresser. The latent potential within us can only be realized under horizontal pressure for vertical purposes. So that means horizontal pressure, get it on, pressed on down so you can stand on up. Ain't that something? Designed for eternity. Yes, ma'am. Consider the biological growth of a human being from conception to full maturity. The sperm or seed of an adult male fertilizes and fuses with the ovum or egg of an adult female. That fertilized egg develops into an embryo and then a fetus over a 9-month period. At the end of the fetus stage, a baby is born into the world. Over a period of years, the infant grows into a toddler and then advances into childhood, then adolescence, and finally adulthood. Notwithstanding any illnesses or other challenges, not a single child brought into the world ever remains in seed form. Not one of us is a large fertilized ovum roaming through the neighborhood. Each of us became something greater. We grew into the full maturity of our potential. What we see in the natural realm is a reflection of what we see spiritually because both are intertwined with each other. As a result, we encounter another version of natural child development in our spiritual nature. In the spiritual realm, there is a process we enter into in which God cultivates and develops us into a healthy vine in his vineyard, and God has made Jesus to be the type of vine we are to exemplify in each stage of life.
Beautiful.
For instance, we already know Christ became human so that he would be familiar with each of our trials, difficulties, and temptations. In essence, he experienced all of the growth pains we would experience. As Jesus grew into stature, we know that he grew in favor with God and with men and began bearing fruit. Though he was an adult producing a wonderful harvest during his years of ministry, he did not come to earth to simply work miracle after miracle. He intended to move from something temporary to something eternal. Through Christ became a physical, no, though Christ became a physical adult, his spirit carried within it the greater promise of an eternal harvest, and not just one made up of miracles that would be temporarily praised. In order for that spiritual promise to be birthed, the supernatural seed had to enter into its own version of development. Like any seed that sprouts, it had to be planted. In essence, everything the seed knows about itself has to end. The seed then must die, just as Christ died so that he could give birth to us. Just as he intended with Christ, God never designed us to remain in seed form. He did not design us in such a fashion because nothing eternal could ever exist temporarily. God's desire has always been to reconnect us back to himself and take us from finite to infinite. From finite to infinite. One of the things I love most about God's Word is how God addresses every season of life, beginning, middle, and end. If Jesus is God's only begotten Son, how could we not assign the same timeless and eternal nature to him that we view in God? In fact, this truth is the foundation from which John begins his gospel account of the life of Christ. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. He came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John 1, 1 through 5 and 14.
Amen.
Since Jesus is the very fruition of God's Word, he must be the beginning of seed of our lives as well. The seed then was already present because Jesus is simultaneously the vine and seed. Therefore, the seed and the vine are one. Confused?
That's right.
Yeah, confused. I know it's mind bending and requires some reflection. Perhaps the Apostle Paul explained it best in his letter to the Galatians. The promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. Scripture
That's right. Promise was to Abraham and to
his seed. Scripture
right.
does not say and to seeds, meaning many people, but and to your seed, meaning one person who is Christ. With Jesus being the seed promised to Abraham as an inheritance, we must ask ourselves what the promise was inside of Jesus that was to be fulfilled. The promise carried by Christ is a beautiful harvest of fruit. Since Jesus is both seed and vine, we are the promised fruit-bearing branches that spring forth from him. During the Last Supper, we see the seed of Abraham speaking with the spiritual offspring that will soon take up the task of not only bearing fruit, but also pointing other dormant seeds of promise back to the life-giving Savior, Jesus Christ. If Jesus is the seed that grew into a vine that produced us as fruit bearing branches. The fruit we produce and lives we live are seeds that God intends for a greater purpose. We were we were created to be more than temporary fruit. We are his eternal vine in the making. How does this process of fermentation into eternal wine occur? Here's the short answer: over time in dirty places. What we see in the natural realm is a reflection of what we see spiritually, because both are intertwined with one another. As a result, we
Wow.
we encounter another version of natural child into adult development in our spiritual nature. In the spiritual realm, there is a process we enter into, which God cultivates and develops us into a healthy vine in his vineyard. And God has made Jesus to be the type of vine we are to exemplify in each stage of life. Jesus is our perfect example, our model of this intended maturation. For instance, we already know Christ to be the seed of Abraham. He came in our likeness so that he would be familiar with our trials, difficulties, and temptations. Hebrews 4 verses 15 and 16. In essence, he experienced all of his growth pains, all of the growth pains we would experience. As Jesus grew in stature, we know that he grew in favor with God, with men, and began bearing fruit. Did I already read that? No. God, some of this stuff be kind of repetitious or something, because I promise
Yeah.
you I read that.
Yeah. But this is true, boy.
Yeah, as Jesus grew in stature, we know that he grew in favor with God and with men, and began bearing fruit. Luke 2 and 52. Though he was an adult producing a wonderful harvest during his 3 years of ministry, Jesus was not. Yeah.
Mm.
No, but I mean this is a whole nother part of the chapter. So it's just, I guess this is just a repeat of what he said previously. His life on earth was not intended to move from something temporary to something eternal. No, let me read that over because that didn't come out right. Though he was an adult producing a wonderful harvest during his 3 years of ministry, Jesus was not meant to simply work miracle after miracle. His life on earth was intended to move from something temporary to something eternal. Though Christ became a physical adult, his spirit carried the even greater promise of an eternal harvest, and not just one made up of miracles that will temporarily be praised.
God is great. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, in order
How we find that know Jesus. My goodness.
in order for that spiritual promise to be birthed, the supernatural seed had to enter into
Mm.
its own development. I mean, this is like repeating everything I just said.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, like any seed, that was sprout, it had to be planted. In essence, everything the seed knows about itself has to end. The seed then must die as Christ died, so that he could give birth to us as God's spiritual children, his divine offspring. If we are called to be like Christ, to become like him, as we are called by God, we must accept the fact that we will experience a similar growth process. Okay, that's why he went back through it and explained it again. As we undergo maturation, we come to understand that our temporary fruit was never the end game and of an everlasting master, but rather just a single step in the process of making eternal wine. As a result, our spiritual development proceeds to mature fruit. Bearing branches demands that we confront a step that many of us grapple with understanding growing in dirty places. Okay, so we go through all these things. We go through all these things in life, and from that what I just read, I get that our experiences, no matter how good or bad they are, all play a part in our growth and development.
Correct. Everything that happens to us in this world is supposed to
And,
help us
and,
grow. And like I said to you
and
the other day,
spiritually and physically, spiritually and
as you get older, you're supposed to draw nearer to God. But it doesn't happen with everyone. You know that?
and spiritually and physically is intertwined. We have to do what we.
But a lot of people don't recognize it.
Yeah, we have to be in tune on the physical realm.
A lot of people don't recognize.
In order to get in tune on the spiritual realm. So we got to do things we got to live and be a certain way physically in order to grow spiritually. And when you grow spiritually, that's your overall growth. And then once you start maturing spiritually, God takes you to higher and higher levels within Him.
Beautiful life. God is
beautiful.
Given us and all the things we experience in this life. Some of us don't even. That's why I said the other day. I don't know who I was talking to, but I said every day that passed, and you didn't give God any time. You was doing everything else. You don't get that day back. That day is gone. It comes back. And you are one step closer to the grave. You are one step closer to the grave.
Okay. Now let's continue. When everything falls apart in our lives, we are broken but not destroyed. The exterior house we've all relied on for so long begins to fail us as the waters of life soften our protective coating. The tender inner life and identity of who we are is naked and helpless in front of those things that threaten the only existence we know. We are placed in perilous circumstances. Excuse me. We rush to secure ourselves and hold everything in place. We shoot roots into the soil beneath us in hope of anchoring ourselves against life's storms. We yearn for someone or something to hold us, lift us, and sustain us, but too often we droop and wilt in the winds of our isolation and loneliness. How do you respond to being broken by life? Where do you try to put down roots to secure your life source? Do you focus on acquiring money only to find that it doesn't fulfill you? Do you reach for sex only to discover that the touch of another person is just a reflection of your own aloneness? Perhaps you reach for church only to realize that religion without God's voice is nothing more than sprinting inside a hamster wheel. Whatever it is that we do while trying to maintain balance and security, sooner or later we typically feel stuck. Our roots stay in place as we strain for the thing we believe will make it all better, because everyone reaches for something when it seems God is silent. After each failure or of ineffective actions, we hoped would anesthetize, anesthetize the pain.
Yeah.
The pain, we stretch ourselves to touch something, anything that will make our loneliness and discomfort more bearable.
Mhm.
In our rush to escape the pain, messiness, and brokenness of our lives, however, we often miss our opportunities for growth. Mixed in the muck of our misguided mindsets, we miss what God may be doing in the midst of this dirty place. With a heave, a strain, a shove, a stretch, and a charge upward, you fight to leave the place you were planted, because surely you believe that God has to have something better for you than where you come from and where you are. Your core your core cries for you to get out of that abusive home. Your heart yearns for escape from poverty. Your gifts expand and surge as you seek to grow your business. Surely, you say, in the midst of God's apparent silence, He will not abandon me in this place of death. Right. When you've lost all hope, you see something you have never witnessed before. When you resolve within yourself that maybe, just maybe, where you are is your assigned light in life, God remains vocally silent and reminds you of His promise by showing you the light you have never seen. You move toward the light, slowly stepping out in faith despite all the pain, fear, shame, and suffering. Breaking through the dark soil of where you were placed in life, you sprout and rise to continue seeing another world of possibilities. The daily place became the nurturing soil that enabled you to grow and blossom in ways you would never have experienced sitting in the safety of a greenhouse.
Wow.
Berry to blossom. Most people love the thought of being gifted and having the ability to do something great, but we don't smile so brightly when we are placed in the refining processes of life. But what happens to a seed if it's not planted? Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls in the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." John 12:24. We cannot rightfully ask our vine dresser to skip out on the development of our lives simply because we are uncomfortable with being alone in dark places. To keep a seed from being planted is to condemn that seed to never realize its fullest potential. It is a fact that seeds are meant to be covered and die. No matter who we are, where we are in life, or where we come from, we must begin to appreciate the ugly stages of our inception. Yeah, we got to learn how to accept the good and the bad about ourselves, and until we can do that, we will not have any peace. That peace beyond understanding. When we allow the Lord to shift our mindset, we begin to see everything that has ever happened to us has happened for a reason. If we look back at the sprout that pushed itself through the seed and the dirt above it, we discover reasons behind our adversity that were previously invisible and unimaginable, but now we are suddenly apparent and miraculous when we arrive at the fruit bearing stage. Looking back, I examine previous periods of my life and remember how fearful I was in the midst of some of them. Now, standing upon over 40 years of ministry, I look at these places and realize they were integral to where God has taken me and where He will continue to take me. I see that each growth interval of my life was preceded by a planting phase where I was buried in a dirty place. I began to understand that the stages of my life were at the time I was certain I was about to meet my end were seed stages for the next season. I could not have produced the fruit without the frustration, and God could not ferment my fruit into His wine for His maximum potency without my willingness to relinquish it to His wine press. Though I have not liked the process, my faith has grown deeper as I discovered the new perspective. I'm telling you, girl, change your mind, change your life. I have I have been changed by this shift in perspective as I accept that God never intended to lead me to a dead place and leave me there. The seeming death which He escorted me was merely the precipice of a new beginning, and a new beginning is what the planting and death of each seed is all about. Through those stages, I arrived at the truth. God wasn't burying me, He was planting me. Those areas and times in which the death of a dream, assignment, or vision seems to stalk your every remove are nothing more than entrances into the next realm of your life. Do not run from them. Embrace them, because the proverbial death of what you are trying to keep alive will enrich the growth and lives of others. Transformation requires sacrifice, and I wonder if you have misinterpreted the vine dresser's intention. Instead of condemning you in a graveyard, which is what you may feel, God is planting you in richer soil for greater fruit. Hmm.
I love it. I love it.
Humbled by hindsight. Allowing my mind to drift back to that day with Sarah on the porch, I marvel at what God has done in all our lives. If I could have known then what I know now, I wouldn't have felt so conflicted about her tear-filled announcement to me. To see the woman she is, the family she has, the mother she has become to all her children, and the wife and co-pastor she has become to my son-in-law is nothing short of a perfect example of what God can do when He is allowed to have His way. To now realize that God had placed her, my then unborn grandson, and me in such symmetrical proximity to one another is mind-blowing. Inside my daughter was the physical manifestation of a seed maturing into something that would soon leave the soil of Sarah's womb. Sarah, at such a young age, was pushed into the dirty soil of who and what she is now. Not only did she have to learn how to be a mother, Sarah was being taken on a crash course in responsible adulthood. Where she had a child in her early teens, she is now sharing with her husband the responsibility of rearing spiritual children that will hear natural and eternal fruit of their own. Will bear. Yeah, then there was me. I discovered that Sarah becoming a mother required me to shed old patterns of thought in order to become the father and grandfather she and my grandson would need. I was taken back through spiritual first grade to relearn some fundamentals of faith in a new way. My family had changed. My perspectives were altered. The bishop from whom pastors and world leaders sought wisdom was having to stay after school with God to receive tutoring in areas where he had no experience. I was humbled and forced to rely on God and to walk by faith like never before. Admittedly, how God decided to develop me in the process was quite unorthodox. It was dark, it was ugly, it was dirty, but looking back at it all, I realized that every day the place of death was so worth the life and fruit that He has produced in my life now. The same is true for you. You okay?
Yeah.
The same is true for you. God is at work, and place too dirty. There's no place too dirty for Him. How Him to use as the rich soil of your maturation and spiritual fruition. Wherever you are, or whatever your dirty place might be, look around you and allow the Master to adjust your thinking. After all, God is not done with you yet. Quality takes time, and you are God's masterpiece.
Wow.
That's the end of chapter 2. Let's look at our study guide questions.
Okay. I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay. This question one. Question 1. When was the last time you got lost while trying to reach an unfamiliar destination?
When was the last time you got lost in an unfamiliar destination? When I was driving.
Okay. Driving.
When I was driving, I used to get lost all the time.
Driving from New York to Georgia.